Hey everyone, and welcome to the Nurses Hub. I'm a bit upset today and I'll let you know why. I wanted to have a talk about addiction. Yep, cocaine, cigarettes, shopping, phones, heroin, addiction. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So I was in this coffee shop, just sitting down having a bit of a coffee, and I heard some young people sitting on a table nearby, and they were talking about how somebody posted that they were 5 years clean or 10 years clean or whatever it was. And they were mocking this person because they didn't seem to think that it was something to be applauded because they shouldn't have stuck something in their arms to begin with, or whatever the addiction was. So the conversation then went down the roads that it's a choice. It's a choice to be addicted. So I thought, okay, rather than just get mad, how about I do some research? And I actually just started to feel sorry for them because they didn't really get it. And I thought, okay, so if there's a group of young people who just don't get it, then there's going to be lots of people who just don't get it, who think that it is a choice for someone to become addicted to someone. So I want to dispel a couple of myths, and I want to give you a bit of science behind it. And I want you coming out the other end of this video having a little bit of compassion and a bit of understanding. So firstly, I wanted to start off by talking about the two different constructs that we try and tackle the addiction problem. The first one is purely a treatment process. We put someone through rehab, we detoxify them, and we send them back out into the community. But more often than not, and I heard this statistic from a drug and rehab counsellor, that someone will try 11 times before they succeed in giving up whatever it is that they're addicted to. 11 times. So what is it that draws somebody back? Is it the addiction itself? Is it the society? What is it? The other part that was really interesting, there was an experiment that was done by Bruce Alexander in the 70s. And basically he set up two environments. One of them, the environment was a rat had access to two bottles. One was laced with heroin and one was just plain water. Now in the cage by itself, the rat ultimately kept going to the one with the heroin and died. And this happened over and over and over. So then they built another enclosure. Not only did they not have just one rat, they had multiple rats, but they also had spinning wheels and they had balls to play with, they had ample food, and they had the two bottles, one with heroin water and one with plain water. The heroin water was used from time to time, but ostensibly it was avoided because the rats were off doing something else. So that then led to the question, okay, are people using drugs because of a lack of something in their community, in their society that's supporting them? And the short answer is yes. So not necessarily using drugs, but going back to use them again and again and again and becoming reliant on them. So the argument there is that people need to form a bond with something. They need to form a connection and a relationship with something. So if the relationships around them are dysfunctional, are hurting them in some way, if the person feels isolated, maybe people are reaching out to them but they don't want them and they feel alone and they feel isolated, and they try drugs, then all of a sudden they've got a relationship with something that makes them feel good. So that's the societal argument for it. There's also a physical thing that happens in our brains. So let's take heroin, for example. So heroin's an opioid, and there's lots of different opioids. So what happens when we take heroin? We have this spike of dopamine that goes up into the air. And when dopamine spikes up, the body has a way of wanting it to be stable. It's called homeostasis. So it increases adrenaline because opioids suppress our ability to breathe and we just stop. So that's what happens when someone takes a heroin overdose. It's actually a respiratory suppressant and our breathing just stops. It tells our brain we don't need to breathe anymore. So up goes the adrenaline to keep the body alert enough to keep breathing. So once we start coming down, we've still got all this adrenaline running around in our system. So we've got anxiety. And following on from anxiety, long term comes depression. The two of them actually go hand in hand. Addiction and depression go hand in hand. And so a person can actually be off drugs for many, many years, but that adrenaline and that body's mechanism trying to create homeostasis remembers that it's got this heroin in the system, and so it still keeps running around with the adrenaline. It's triggered something in the brain, and they've discovered what it is that's triggered, and it's a thing called dynorphin. Now, we're probably all aware of endorphins. Well, dynorphins are kind of the opposite, and they're just starting to do some really exciting research into the impact these dynorphins have in addiction and the associated depression that follows. It not only happens with heroin and other opioids, it happens with alcohol. They've actually tracked what happens with the neurotransmitters, and that's what dynorphin and all the other ones are. They're all neurotransmitters. They tell the nerves in the body what message to keep sending along to the brain, from the brain, throughout the body to make it work. And with alcohol, there are two neurotransmitters that are particular culprits. So we've got GABA and we've got glutamate. So GABA is the depressive neurotransmitter and glutamate is the excitatory neurotransmitter. So we drink and our glutamate goes up, but it goes up beyond what the body sees as normal. And so we want homeostasis. We want to balance things out. So the GABA goes up. So once the alcohol leaves our system, we've got a whole heap of GABA running around in our system. It's the depressive one. It's the one that makes us feel terrible. So what they've looked at, because they had so much success in the research they did with opioid use, is that they looked to see whether dynorphins were at play with this GABA glutamate homeostasis regulation, and they found that dynorphins were involved in there as well. And so it really is a mechanical thing that's happening inside our brain with all our neurotransmitters, that when we take a substance, that our brains are changed. Now, our brains remember things, and they remember things going back to when we're children. So you can not ride a bike for 10 years and get on and automatically know how to ride a bike. You can not knit for 20 years, pick up a pair of knitting needles and start knitting. Your body remembers, you have muscle memory. I recently watched a video from, I think it was Britain's Got Talent or America's Got Talent, one of those, where a deaf girl who had been deaf since she was 18, and I think she was in her late 20s or early 30s, sang beautifully. She used muscle memory. So everything in our body remembers what it's ever done. And the brain is no different. We have neural pathways that are solidified. It's like walking a dirt path. The more you walk it, the more of a path it becomes. If you stop walking on it for a little while, a couple of weeds grow, but you can still see that it's a path. The same thing happens with our neurotransmitters. So when we use something often enough, we've tracked this path to the point that the body remembers that this is a legitimate path. This is how we do things. And so you cannot have heroin for a very long time. You cannot have alcohol for a very long time. But your body remembers what it does when it has it. And so this is why they say that you're in recovery for the rest of your life. Because one drink, one hit of heroin will have your body remembering the relationship that you have with it. And so I think it's a combination of the two. I'll put a link up to a TED talk that I watched, and it was brilliant. This gentleman had or has family members who suffer from addiction, and he wanted to know how he could help them. So he went and he spoke to a whole heap of different people, and his understanding was that it's just societal. And he used the rat park experiment as an example. He also referred to Portugal. Portugal had a 1% drug addiction rate for the entire population. Now, if that was Australia with 26 million people in it, then that would be equivalent to 260,000 people all addicted. That's staggering numbers. And so they got together and they worked out, okay, what are we going to do? Got all the best scientists and all the rest of it together, and they said decriminalise the lot. So their rates of people affected by drugs have gone down by half. Their crime's gone down. Their death from overdose rates have gone down significantly. So that tells me that there is a huge societal impact on addiction. It also tells me, the science also tells me, that there are physical things that happen in the brain. Now, I know that people going to Alcoholics Anonymous, they have somebody to connect with, because we can't do it on our own. And so when I look back at these kids sitting at the table, they didn't get what it was not to have friends, because they were in their community. They didn't need to even go down the road of having drugs, maybe experiment at a party here and there. But they didn't need to make a relationship with a substance, because they already had healthy relationships in their lives. And so when you develop an unhealthy relationship with something that is not a human being, and you need to stop that relationship, whether it be alcohol, whether it be drugs, whether it be your mobile phone, whether it be food, then you absolutely need to be applauded. Because every day you wake up and you'll be saying, today I'm not going to have that as a relationship in my life. And that is to be applauded. That's courage. So while I understand where these kids were coming from, sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Sometimes you can't understand something unless you experience it. Either experience it closely because you have people that you love going through it or you've experienced it yourself. And I thank God that these kids haven't got that in their lives, that they've got good, healthy relationships. So is addiction a choice? I think the jury's actually still out, because ultimately people get to a point where they go, enough's enough. And they choose not to have that relationship anymore. But the devastation that is done up to that point where they make that choice is horrendous. The devastation that's done to them and the devastation that's done to their families, their workplaces, their homes. And it wouldn't even need to get to that point where they need to make that choice if taking drugs didn't have people going to jail. If we had really good ways of connecting people together. If we didn't live on our phones and we talked to people face to face. We arranged to go out with people. Let's go and meet for coffee instead of texting somebody on the phone, how you going? This is another Nurses Hub video. Is addiction a choice? I'll leave it up to you. Write in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching.